So I'm going to start by introducing the panel. And so Joe Hopkins, who you just heard from, is with the Los Angeles Police Department. We have Mike Bowers, who is with Northgate Markets. We have Carl Langhorst, who is with Alto. And we have Jose, oh God, Jose, I'm sorry. I had it right the other day, and now I'm just going to screw up your last name. I can't say it. I apologize, and I don't have my notes in front of me anymore. You can introduce yourself again when you get your first question. But I'm going to go ahead and start off the same way I did last week, which is with you again, Joe. And that is, what are the benefits of participating in an ORCA?
So as I mentioned in the video, ORCAs act as a force multiplier, specifically for the organizations that may not necessarily have a robust ORC unit. It's a collaborative effort, so it provides the ability for retailers who, I guess, for lack of a better term, are stakeholders who receive the same incidents that occur to each retailer. They can partner to address the issues. ORCAs also, and during these general membership meetings, like I alluded to earlier, we also have these general membership meetings. And at these meetings, we come together and share information. Now, for me, the aha moment in dealing with the ORCAs was my first general membership meeting, where we were sitting there and someone presented a case. And in the crowd, someone else said, hey, these same individuals are impacting my store as well. And we connected these individuals together to collaboratively work to address this issue. And then also you can bring in other law enforcement officers who may be investigating these individuals and you're just not aware of that. So it's a great partnership. I think is extremely beneficial. And then also the other mechanism we have is the ability to provide training. We can provide training to not only our retail partners, but law enforcement through the local area and throughout the entire state if we went through Cal ORCA. So ORCAs are a huge benefit to retail partners as well as our law enforcement partners. So it's extremely beneficial in my eyes.
Great, thank you, Joe. I'm going to actually turn that over to a retailer now. Mike, what are your thoughts from a retail perspective as to the benefits of belonging to an ORCA or participating in an ORCA?
I think, Joe certainly touched on a number of benefits. One that I would like to drill in on just for a second is the collaboration part. We are very fortunate in this profession to be able to collaborate with one another because we have a common purpose. And that collaboration can be really powerful. It can be powerful in helping our law enforcement and prosecutorial partners. It can be helpful in informing the types of laws that we need to pursue. And certainly can be helpful for the general safety of the public. And we come together to talk about those things at, conferences and through trade associations like ORCAs. So that's one huge benefit. And I think another thing that sometimes we may tend to gloss over is the fact that nobody's out there scheduling time on their calendars for organized retail crime. It's happening to us. And unless we're very intentional about that approach and set aside time for those conversations and dedicate ourselves to it, we probably won't get into it at the level that we need to make a meaningful impact.
Great. Thank you, Mike. And then Jose, I'm going to turn it over to you. Same question from a prosecutor standpoint. I don't know how heavily you are or not involved in the ORCAs, but what is your feedback on ORCAs from your perspective as to the benefits? You're still on mute, Jose.
Sorry about that. Here we go. So it's Egger B Day, common spelling.
Thank
you. No, but I would just echo Mike's comments and, and Joe's as well. As a city attorney's office, as opposed to the LA County District Attorney's office, we don't have investigative powers. And so we rely on information from LAPD and from the retailers to put our cases together. So, to echo what's already been said, that the benefit of ORCAs are, the increased level of collaboration between private companies, public sector agencies like LAPD and the city attorney's office, and also the shared responsibility and accountability, which gives us greater access to information, and helps us to put together stronger cases. And we realize that these public-private partnerships are extremely critical to actually making a difference in terms of this tremendous problem.
Thank you, Jose. Carl, I want to turn it over to you. I'm going to shift that question a little bit, and certainly you can follow up on that question as well. But from your standpoint, have you heard frustrations expressed from retailers, law enforcement, and prosecutors that are negatively impacting the building of partnerships that will substantially impact ORC activity?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Well, first of all, I just want to go back to Joe's, some of his opening comments on your question about his chief. Chief Moore has just been fantastic to work with, as is the whole LAPD department from an Alto perspective. So had the pleasure of meeting him several times. So really a strong advocate for a community private sector partnership with law enforcement. And to that point, ORCAs have really done a good job raising the awareness about ORC and helping to align retail and law enforcement investigative resources. They are absolutely an invaluable resource, and I encourage retailers and all law enforcement to support ORCAs, just as we have done so at Alto. However, what I've seen is communication and partnership silos still exist between the retail and law enforcement communities. I witness almost on a daily basis, Tony, that retailers are struggling to get law enforcement to understand the scope of the problems that ORC creates, not only from a financial perspective, but even more importantly, from a store employee and customer safety perspective. In many jurisdictions, we're seeing that law enforcement response to ORC is a significant struggle for the stores to get law enforcement to respond. And then conversely, from the law enforcement leaders that I speak with, sometimes I hear them place the blame on ORC on retailers, and their guidance to retailers is to lock up the high theft product and hire more off-duty police officers. And then getting from the prosecutor's perspective, because we deal with those daily as well, they tell us about a struggle to get the necessary evidence to successfully prosecute a case or to get security and retail witnesses to even show up in court. And so the discourse that we're hearing really makes it a struggle to get cases prosecuted or even get the law enforcement to show up at the stores. And kind of goes down to what I've heard throughout my career in law enforcement and then in retail loss prevention. It leads to finger pointing rather than partnerships. And we all know that the only winners in this type of environment are the fences and boosters. But what we've seen that with continual communication, not only from ORCAs, but relationship building starting with the store manager and local patrol officers and prosecutors, we're continuing to see that that's paying great dividends in building partnerships and reducing retail crime.
Thank you, Carl. Appreciate that. Jose, I'm going to turn it over for you to you. From your experience as a prosecutor, what is the first thing retailers must do to help disrupt this growing trend of theft, disruptive conduct, and in some cases violence that they're seeing in their stores today?
So I think, when the moment that retailers give up and they just say, well, my insurance will cover it, or I'm just not going to report it because, the law enforcement is going to take 3 hours to show up here, and, I don't want to keep this person detained for too long and expose myself to liability. The moment that we stop reporting, or the retailers stop reporting, is the moment that, that we start losing the battle, because we as prosecutors, like I said before, rely on information to put these cases together. And there has to be, this due process. I'm sensitive to the law enforcement challenges that, crime is not, petty theft crime is not really a suppressible crime to the extent that you can't just put more officers at the mall and have it stop. That's just not practical. And there are other crimes that, that are also priorities. But I think that there needs to be, there needs to be a reporting structure so that at least the incident is documented. I think that's, somewhere where an organization like Alto is very critical. There needs to be due process, an agency with the color of authority that can, that can review the reports that have been put together and confirm that a crime in fact has been committed. And then, that's what allows us to then take over and do our job. If retailers are get frustrated and they stop reporting, or they start to implement some other alternatives on their own, and then after the fourth or fifth time that this person's been in their store, they get tired and they finally call the cops, and it gets sent to my office, it's going to look like a first-time offense, and a judge is going to look at it as a first-time offense. And so without that background, or without the documentation on all the prior events and the due process that we've collected and cataloged that information, it's more difficult for us as prosecutors to tell a judge, hey, we've tried everything. We've tried prosecutor-led diversions. We've tried to link this person up with resources, and now we're here because we've tried everything else and it hasn't worked. So I think there needs to be that level of collaboration and that level of information sharing in order for everybody to do their job along the way.
Thank you, Jose. That leads me to another question, actually, that's it's going to be directed at you, Mike. It's related to some of the comments that Jose just had. But, as a country, obviously, a lot of states have raised felony limits. Certainly all of you on this call, except for myself, are in California, right? And so you're all familiar with Prop 47 and some other things. And so when it comes to, the raising of felony limits and all these different aspects that have happened over the years, in this, Mike, I'm going to start with you, is in what ways has dealing with crime become more challenging since these laws have been, we'll say, relaxed?
Yeah, that's a good question, Tony. And I think that the first thing that many of us would point to is just a feeling of hopelessness and being out of control. If you're in law enforcement and you're responsible for, maintaining peace and order in the community, and, tools are taken away that, were effective at combating that, or if you're a retailer and you're seeing that people are coming in and doing things that, are creating danger in your store, like, frequent shoplifting. I mean, that obviously, can lead to an immediate sense of despair and hopelessness. And that's a big challenge. I think that, beyond that, there's obviously the financial ramifications. And, I think about society as a whole and the impact it has when, there's a perception that we're tolerant of people not following laws because we're a nation of laws. And so, those are some things that come to mind immediately. But I think that there's a lot that we can do about it. I think that beyond just that feeling of hopelessness, Jose, outlined some things about, just being diligent with making reports. And that might seem like LP 101 to our listeners or our viewers, but, the truth is when there's that intersection of hopelessness and, it can sometimes lead to a lack of desire to follow through on things like that. And those basic things are great tools for our law enforcement and prosecutorial partners to identify trends. I think there's some other things too. I've got to really thank Carl and his organization, Alto. They've done a fantastic job helping me and my team do a better job of reporting incidents, but they've also taken situations where, quite honestly, we felt like, it was hopeless that there would be a prosecution. We've had misdemeanor offenses that have resulted in jail time as a result of his organization intervening and representing our company in court, but more importantly, showing an accurate depiction of the type of trends that are taking place, that this isn't a first-time offense. This isn't an experimentation. This is a serial organized crime that's being committed. And, I know that the law enforcement teams, and I know that our prosecutorial staff, they want to help. That is not the type of society that they want. And, I think we've been able to do a much better job of it with Carl and his team's help. So that's one resource that I would point to that has taken us out of the hopeless area and into the hopeful area.
Great, thank you, Mike. This next question, actually, I'm going to toss this one to you, Carl. Is what role, Mike mentioned some of the struggles, obviously, in that feeling of despair or whatever, and a lot of that occurs, and obviously I work in the retail environment, is from the employees, right? They're working in the stores, right? So what role, if any, does store level management and local law enforcement relationships play in addressing ORC and shoplifting?
Yeah, great question. I mean, the goal of every loss prevention AP professional is to stop the crime before it ever happened, right? To prevent it. I know that's something I certainly preached when I was sitting in that chair, and my team members as well. And so that partnership with store members and store management and law enforcement, we've seen is really critical. Not only for ORC, but also deterring other crime on the premises. And it's something that we've been able to capitalize on one store at a time with our model and our staff that actually works and coordinates between law enforcement and retailers and bridges that gap, communication gap, not only at senior level, but all the way down to the patrol officer level. And specifically, and I'm going to use LA as an example because that's where we've launched and now expanded outside of LA and California. But they have what they call a senior lead officer there, and many departments have an equivalent of some sort. And we actually coordinate meetings between the SLO, the senior lead officer, and the store manager. And if that gives an opportunity for that store manager to know the officer that's going to be coming into their store, and build that partnership with him or her. And at the same time, the officers really have enjoyed building that relationship, and they certainly enjoy having another friendly face they can talk to, especially in today's challenge each time. And they can share information about ongoing trends in the area. And that maybe the SLO has, and quite often they do, a suggestion to the store manager, a really workable suggestion to help reduce the problems they're having. And at the same time, the managers and the employees even in the store can put that human perspective on it. It's not the big Fortune 50 company that's losing money. It's the manager and the employees, who many of us in retail know that their stores are almost their first homes because they spend so much time there. So it's a partnership building that really starts to build the foundation for ORC investigations and deterrence.
Thank you, Carl. Joe, same question for you, just to get a law enforcement perspective. From a store management, what does that relationship look like, or how can that help with local law enforcement and store level management from your perspective?
Yeah, so I'm going to echo some of the Carl sentiments as well, because, and I'm going to flip it, and I think I mentioned to you guys previously. So there's quite often, I'm the department liaison. I'm the community business coordinator for LAPD. And so within our department and outside, so law enforcement agencies will contact me from all over when they're looking for a resource. And someone from the business community, some of my security partners, things of that nature. And it astonishes me sometimes where I say, well, did you reach out to these individuals? And then once you've made this contact, are you cultivating these relationships? It's extremely important. Even some of the detectives who work for me, they have a case that they may be inquiring into, and they'll contact me and say, hey, Joe, do you know someone from this business establishment? And I'm like, of course, but you have that resource as well through ORCA, through all of our partnerships, and you can cultivate these relationships where you don't need me to contact them on your behalf. So it's extremely important. And once you've made this connection, don't just take it for granted. I mean, you have to continuously work on building these relationships, because there's going to be a time where you're really going to need that partner to step up on your behalf. And if you have not built this relationship, a trustworthy relationship, when it really counts, then you're going to be behind trying to build this rapport with that individual. So the good thing for me is I spent a good majority of my career, and I learned this from other seasoned detectives, of building these relationships. And, you know, I'm very proud to say that I have these relationships where I can reach out to many people for whatever issues that we may be facing as a department as a whole. I get calls from commanding officers, from deputy chiefs, things of that nature when they need some assistance on a specific issue and they don't have that contact. So like I said, it's great that the retailers, but I also would encourage our law enforcement personnel to do the same, because you never know when you're going to need that person.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate that. Jose, I'm going to turn over to you for, again, another prosecutor-related question. You know, some retailers say that they struggle with getting prosecutors to understand the severity of the problem, the recidivist offenders, you know, are doing to their stores, right? What, just from your perspective, how would you tell them to handle that if they are getting pushback? Maybe they're not getting responses. And then also, in conjunction with that, what are some new methods prosecutors are successfully implementing to address the theft problem?
So we oftentimes feel the same frustrations that retailers and law enforcement feel, you know, around this problem. You know, without a doubt, around the country, and especially in California, we are seeing legislative changes, new bills, an ever-changing political landscape when it comes to, for example, prison realignment and the effect that that's having, the push-down effect that's having on local county jails, calls to drop the LA County Jail daily average of prisoners or individuals that are awaiting trial while in custody, and, you know, criminal justice reformer efforts. All of those impact our ability to just respond to an issue like petty theft with just, you know, incarceration or more jail time as a deterrent. And so, you know, that has an effect on us, and it just means that we all have to evaluate and approach the problem in a different way. We at the City Attorney's Office have, you know, have implemented a number of alternative prosecution programs as a way to, you know, problem solve around this issue. And one of the critical aspects of this is identifying the different populations that are committing petty theft and really getting to the root cause behind their activity. It's, you know, I think that we have different populations, the organized retail criminals that, you know, whose sort of MO or business is to go from store to store stealing items. Versus that first or second time offender that is really, you know, an 18 to 25-year-old that is, you know, guilty of being dumb in public, or maybe is stealing because, you know, of any number of reasons that really have nothing to do with sort of like that being their business. And the more that we can use tools and technology out there that can, like dynamic risk assessment tools that can identify, you know, dynamic needs for that individual, whether it's housing, education, you know, employment issues, that if we could successfully address those issues through an engagement plan, that person is less likely to recidivate, then we can start dealing with that population and then really limit the petty theft offenders that are going to court and making a more persuasive argument with a judge that that's a different population and it needs to be treated differently because their reason for committing these crimes are just profit. And so, you know, I want to share, you know, to someone's point, I don't know if it was Mike and, you know, I think Carl, Mike, and Joe all agree, we all agree that retailers, to the extent they can be a better neighbor and, you know, and be a sort of part of the community they're in, you know, that's a good thing. But also, you know, the idea that we can actually be very effective with a prosecutor-led diversion program that has a 97% success rate and whose participants will actually recidivate at 5 times lower the rate than if we prosecuted them, convicted them, put them on probation, and hung a criminal conviction around their neck. So we have data around that. And the more we can share that with law enforcement and with retailers, the more we can start separating these populations. And I think we can be much more effective.
Great. Thank you, Jose. Carl, I'm going to turn this question to you. Jail space is limited across most of the country. Certainly California is no exception to that. What are you hearing from the courts in Los Angeles when alto attorneys appear in court to seek justice on behalf of the retail victims?
Tony, first, we've been really pleasantly surprised that both prosecutors and the judges, not only in Los Angeles, but again in other courts throughout California, have been overwhelmingly receptive to the innovative approach of having alto attorneys appear on behalf of the retail victims. And I did say the word victims. We show up as victim advocates for the retailers. And I will tell you truthfully, from a former AP executive perspective, I was often of the thought process that retail theft offenders could not be held accountable for their actions in California since the passage of Prop 47. And admittedly, while it's been difficult, but with the right case preparation and presentation, we continue to see these offenders held accountable for their actions. But as you notice, jail space is limited, and not just in California, but quite frankly, in many jurisdictions across the country. But most of the cases that the offenders we see in court are the boosters or low-level offenses. And I know those that are involved with ORC from an investigative standpoint can relate to this. More often than not, these individuals are drug addicts and or have mental problems. And sentencing to jail or repeatedly seeing the courts give them time served does little to break the recidivist cycle. They're right back at it again. And our attorneys have been very successful thus far in partnering with prosecutors to petition the court to mandate drug or mental counseling for these offenders, as well as to implement stay-away orders from our clients' locations. Our goal is, and it's much like Jose just said, is to break the behavior, the recidivist behavior, and in doing so, improve our clients' stores and subsequently the community. And because of this unique approach, when our attorneys believe that jail time is the only option, and there are those cases that need to be implemented to deter an offender, then the courts have been much more receptive to listening to and subsequently honoring that request from our attorneys.
Great. Thank you, Carl. Mike, I'm going to refer back to an original question I asked you, and it's kind of related to Carl's response just now. You mentioned that different things you're doing, right, since laws have been relaxed, right? How have things changed as a result of these new strategies that you're using at your company?
Well, I alluded to this a bit earlier, but, we're in a position where we really didn't know about any of the dispositions of the criminal complaints that we filed. And it's my suspicion that none of them were adjudicated. And perhaps charges were dropped, perhaps they were never filed. We know we made the complaint, but we don't know where it went from there. And, with the Alto team, one of the things that they did is they helped us organize around making sure that we had really good incident capture as just the base of understanding what the activity levels were and where challenges really were. And then, the next piece of that is being very targeted with our resources. So, if we're going to put an undercover shoplifting team or security into a location, making sure that we had a very good business case to do it and that we would get a return for doing that. And then, the next piece is obviously dealing with the crime. Now, I think everybody would agree, Northgate, Gonzalez markets, we're part of the communities that we're in. We're not just a grocery store, but we're part of the community, and we hire people from the community. And, the people who work there, they have, sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, fathers and mothers that are also community members. And the people coming into, a grocery store are part of the community. We don't want to be in a position where we have to prosecute people. That is not our goal. We're there to help serve the community in many other ways, but that's not something we want to do. I think with Alto really helping us point our resources in the right places, and then seeing those cases through court, we can make sure that if someone made a mistake, they're treated differently than someone who had, much different intent. And, I really appreciate the thought leadership that Jose and people like Jose bring to the table, because at the end of the day, reducing recidivism is the goal. I mean, that's really what we're all after. We just don't want the crime. And, however we get there, we're going to only do it in partnership with one another. And that's one of the big things I think that Alto has really helped us do, is to step up those partnerships and that communication where we can connect in a meaningful way to bring that change.
Thank you, Mike. Joe, is from an education or outreach standpoint, what types of that is occurring in reference to inform law enforcement, district attorneys, and retail partners of organized retail theft or organized retail crime? You know, obviously, there's still a lot of folks out there that don't know what it is. You mentioned earlier agencies are reaching out to you. What types of education and outreach is being currently conducted that you're aware of?
As I mentioned earlier about some of the local general membership meetings, and at those meetings, we will typically have a guest speaker, someone who can provide some input, some training, some insight. And also what accompanies this guest speaker are case presentations. And I also alluded to the aha moment. During these case presentations, a lot of things are resolved as a result just of mere us meeting and addressing the same issues and topics that are impacting all of us. So that's one aspect just in the general membership meeting. And obviously, like pretty much the rest of the nation, at Cal ORCA, we'll have, our goal is to have a conference. And the good thing is with this conference, as I mentioned, our chief of police has allowed me, what I'm able to do is send letters to every law enforcement agency in the state of California, inviting them to our Cal ORCA conference. So that's a huge thing, because obviously if we can get law enforcement involved, then obviously we can have our retail partners participate as well. And obviously during this meeting, this conference, as opposed to having, 20 to 70 people in a meeting, we can have 800 people in attendance, and we can provide the necessary training that's beneficial to us all. And on top of that, obviously, for those who are aware, with the implementation of Assembly Bill 1065, it created the CHP task force. So obviously, with the CHP task force that investigates organized retail theft, I reached out to them, and we partnered and had meetings to address some of the issues. I brought them into the fold. They provided training. And so this is something that's, again, a force multiplier. We got these guys involved, and they've hit the ground running with it. And then they bring some of our LAPD personnel on board, specifically if they're investigating things within the city. So by this collaborative effort, we're able to reach a lot more law enforcement and retailers just by having these meetings and coming together as a whole. So with that, it's extremely beneficial and been successful up until this point.
Great. I just want to remind the audience, the pre-recorded session was 45 minutes long. We're almost at 45 minutes now. So I know we have a couple questions here in the queue, but at this point, if you do have any questions, we're going to keep on rolling. But if we get some additional questions in the thread here, I'll certainly broach those questions as well. So don't be afraid to ask. This next question goes to you, Jose. What methods would be most effective in dealing with individual prosecutors who decide not to prosecute certain types of crime or impose their own minimum offense levels that do not follow the laws of the land?
Wow, that's a great question, Tony. I mean, we in our office we have our branch prosecutors, and they are traditional prosecutors. They're assigned to a court, and oftentimes they get a file, and there's really no connection between, other than what's in a report, between themselves and the community. One of the things that, our city attorney prides himself on is the expansion of community prosecutors or neighborhood prosecutors. And that has transformed our office into having a whole army of attorneys that are stepping out of the courtroom and into the community, where they are creatively problem solving with law enforcement, with the council office, with retailers, with other community members. They go to town halls. So they are very much part of the community, which goes to that whole concept of, start by being a good neighbor and a good member of the community. So I think that for us, that's the way to address the disconnect between a retailer and maybe their feelings that, a prosecutor doesn't appreciate what they're going through, because we do have attorneys that are working in the community. And so, these alternatives to just the traditional or the core function of our work, tied together with the risk assessments and identification of root causes, for these, for the activity, has led to tremendous success on our part. We're very proud of the results that we're getting, and we're changing the minds of our, even our traditional prosecutors, because they see the metrics and the outcomes associated with these alternative treatments. I'll illustrate my point by saying that, throughout my career, I've seen when you engage the community and individual community members, you can actually get changed behavior. And I think that's our collective goal, is to change behavior. And so we've had situations with distressed properties where we have engaged gang members to actually repair those distressed properties within their own neighborhoods. And that's led to those properties actually avoiding getting tagged and getting broken into and trespassed and property damage. Why? Because now you've got individual community members that are invested in that particular property. In the same way with retail theft, if we can start identifying some of these young offenders and try to engage them in a different way, in a more creative way, I think it could lead to better outcomes.
Great, thank you, Jose. Joe, I'm going to ask you this question. Retailers who seek to escalate chronic crime problems are sometimes confronted by lack of reported incidents. How should they coach their store leaders to deal with law enforcement agencies who refuse to take reports of crime or chide store leaders for wasting their time with low-level crime?
And like Jose said earlier, it's the same for us. If it's not reported, then we don't have we can't allocate resources to address that particular issue. And so, I mean, I know, I clearly understand, because I hear it from a lot of people. I get those calls quite frequently. And so the good thing is here, I mean, like I said, I've been designated, at least within this department, to be that conduit. So, I would encourage our retailers that it is important. And I know it's a timely hassle. You don't want to go through the steps, because maybe sometimes the responding officer may not understand the gravity of the situation, or may not see the long-term goal of initiating a crime report. But it is beneficial. It is important that we have it. So what I would encourage you to do is, it is important to keep the relationship, a good relationship with that patrol officer, because you never know when you're going to see that person again. But it's also important that you express to them how necessary it is. And if they don't want to do that, there are other steps or other means you can do by, touching base, like, hey, it's important. Maybe I can talk to, your supervisor to try to get this resolved, because it's important to us, because we need to have this resolved. And then, like I said, a lot of times I get these phone calls. So I am able to resolve some of the situations in the patrol function when, they may not necessarily think it's important to do so. But, we have to start there. And if we ruffle a little bit of feathers, we can smooth them out in other ways. But I would encourage everyone to not just let it go by the wayside, because we need that data. We need to be able to allocate resources to that specific issue. And if it's not reported, it doesn't exist, unfortunately.
Thank you, Joe. I know you touched on ORCAs earlier. There's a question that came in, and keep in mind, obviously, the audience, right? A lot of the audience may not be used to using ORCAs. They've never used them before, right? So this question here is, how do individual ORCAs share information amongst each other on common MOs and gangs? And I know, Joe, you mentioned meetings, obviously, or the conference, but what other ways do they use to share information, the ORCAs themselves?
So, I mean, I've been doing this for, 5-6 years, maybe a little more. And there has always been discussion of a national ORCA. But until that happens, at least for in California, that was the whole premise behind the creation of Cal ORCA. So in California, we have many, many local ORCAs, let's say. For instance, LA ORCA, San Diego ORCA, Inland Empire ORCA, we had Bay ORCA, we had things of that nature. And there's always, like we mentioned before, a bit of a silo effect to it, where, you know, in that little arena, people would communicate with each other. And then the only way you would get information is if someone in that one ORCA was part of another ORCA. And so that was the whole reason we said, well, it doesn't make sense. Why not try to build something that encompasses all of California, which is what we did. Now the next goal is to bridge the gap between the states, because obviously we're quite aware that, you know, these individuals are not just staying in one location. So for many, many years, that has been a topic of discussion. But for now, you know, I think it's important that we have the local ORCAs, but it's extremely important that we then build upon it by having these regional ORCAs. We do have, like I said, state and multi-state ORCAs, because the information sharing is key and extremely important. The next goal is now trying to bridge all of that nationally. So we'll see where that takes us, and there's been many, many discussions to have that implemented.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And then Carl, I think you wanted to provide some additional feedback on one of the questions. I think it was related to law enforcement not responding to the store. And I know we're running short on time. Can you be a little brief, because I do want to do a recap here in just a minute. So, but again, if you can follow up on that response.
Yeah, thanks. It really goes back to the relationship building question you asked earlier at the local level, and bonding with that local patrol officer, and then quite frankly, even with his or her commanders. And that's what we've been very successful of, and give a shout out to Mike and Northgate, and then to Walgreens and Rite Aid. They've held community events, getting the community in, tacos with cops, cones with cops at Rite Aid. They have good ice cream, and having those community events, but building those partnerships. And in the event that a local officer just won't respond, then that's, you know, what we've been very successful in getting that elevated to the right person, so they understand the problems there. It's a partnership.
Great. Thank you, Carl. And then Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you. Again, I know we're going to need to wrap up here in just a minute, but I wanted to get to this question. And I'm a retailer, so I want to hear a retailer's perspective on this answer, okay? What work do we still need to do? We're talking about a lot of things we've already done or that are in process, but in your mind, what work still needs to be done?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think, you know, Joe alluded to the fact that, you know, we need to have some communication across the ORCAs. I would say that a big outstanding task is really to get our trade associations at every level to connect over situations that we're facing across the nation. I mean, for example, we're talking about trends where, you know, we have, you know, public servants that are changing their interpretation of the law and deciding not to prosecute crimes that, you know, the law intended to be, you know, punished. And so I think in that case, we need to just figure out how we can get our trade associations connected with one another and, you know, talking about the topics that are most important so that we can address this more broadly. Because some of these items, you know, are going to be tough when you've got a trendsetter and others are trying to follow suit. So that would be the biggest thing probably on my wish list, Tony.
Great. Thank you, Mike. All right. Well, I just want to thank all the presenters and certainly the audience. I do want to encourage everyone to join us all in Washington, D.C. I hope to be there myself. Hopefully things are a little cleared up by then. It's April 25th through the 28th for the Retail Asset Protection Conference. So encourage everyone to attend that. And again, just thank everybody for being here. Apologize for those technical glitches, and thank the presenters for going through this all over again, just like we did last week. So thank you for that. And everybody have a great day. Thank you.